Hello and welcome to the CNBC TV 18 special. I'm Ronojoy Banerjee and we are discussing the roadmap for the Indian IT sector till the year 2025. And in conversation with me today is an esteemed panel from McKinsey and NASSCOM. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining me on this Monday morning on a discussion where we can talk about and look at how technology can be leveraged by the Indian IT sector to take the next big leap forward. Let me start by asking you, Mr. Barton. Many would say we are in the midst of this massive technological revolution. Business models are being challenged almost on a regular basis. Look what Uber has done to establish taxi service. What would you say has been the big takeaway? Has the breakdown in entry barriers been the big sort of revolution that technology has brought in for businesses?
Well, I completely agree. We are very much in the midst of a massive technological revolution. It's affecting everyone. There's no industry, sector, organization that's not going to be affected by it. And one of the biggest drivers is technology allows you to break over any barriers. You said you talked about the Uber side. I think the notion of a shared economy just wasn't even thought of 5 years ago. It just wasn't on the table. Hotel rooms, cars. But I think it has even more profound implications for business models. You know, in healthcare, we're going to just people. What I think the most profound thing of something like an Uber is, I'm used to this type of service now that's so convenient, so interesting and useful to use. Why can't I find a doctor that way? Why can't I get a driver's license in a short period of time? So it's setting the bar for everyone. And the challenge is a lot of these innovations are occurring outside the sector that you're in. So this is going to be very disruptive. I'm very positive about it, but very disruptive. Many new businesses, many new jobs are going to be formed. Many jobs are going to get automated. It's a time of tremendous change, but I think opportunity.
Right, because you've written extensively on this whole idea of long-term capitalism. I mean, you and even Michael Porter in Harvard Business School has been talking about that. So how can technology play a role in terms of, you know, like the three big changes that you would want to see? You've said in the past is about a long-term vision, creating value across the value chain, not just for your customers, and also making boards more responsive. So in that sense, what role do you think technology can play for long-term capitalism?
Well, I think technology, by its definition, you know, there's a lot of short-term changes. It's going to have profound longer-term implications in what you do. So if you're a board, you can't think just about the next 2 to 3 years. You better think very hard about whether our business model is even going to survive over that time frame. What are the sectors that we should be involved in? How can we better relate to stakeholders to have them involved? It's going to have it is by its very nature so profound it'll be long term.
Nobody knows. Nobody has the answers to those questions as we sit here. Mr. Reddy, let me bring you on that, because the big takeaway from this report is that the disruptive force of yesterday, which is how the world saw the Indian IT sector, is now on the risk of getting disrupted. So how does one insulate, or can you insulate yourself, or do you sort of need to go with the flow, and how do you sort of leverage whatever we are seeing in the technological field to take the next big leap till 2025?
Good, thank you, good question. Because there's no necessity for the Indian IT industry to isolate itself, because they are in the middle of this large technology disruption. It's a question of companies which are in existence at this point of time reinvesting into these areas, whether it is in the shape of R&D, in terms of sales and marketing, or proof of concept, to ensure that we go back to the same customers to say we do have the same capability. So therefore, I don't think that there is companies which are conscious about this technology change, and I believe that most of them are very conscious about it, are not under any threat with the new technology. They'll all reshape themselves.
Right. Ms. Reddy is saying that companies are conscious of this technological change. Let me bring you on that, because the one thing the report talks about is that some industries in India, they've happily and quickly embraced technology like financial services, but other important sectors like healthcare and manufacturing have not. So is there a sense that the later these companies embrace and sort of make technology sort of a running thread in their business, the later they do it, the more uncompetitive they may become?
So the power of technology being pervasive, it's actually becoming the single greatest determinant on return on invested capital. So if your return on technology is actually good, your return on invested capital is good by definition. And that's actually the importance of technology as we have seen it coming over the last decade and probably in the next decade, right? Which is why we're actually projecting that this industry, which has grown sixfold in the last decade, is actually poised to grow currently from about 130 billion odd to nearly 350 billion in the next 10 years, right? That is the size, scale, and impact of this industry. To your question, that would not happen if it didn't derive competitive differential, right? And yes, the sectors that grab it first are being disrupted faster. Is the opportunity there for India? Absolutely. We've actually said in the report that we think that outside of this industry has massive impact. Because if you look at our estimation in the next 10 years, almost 20 to 30% of India's incremental GDP growth could be fueled by this industry. Not delivered by this industry, fueled or enabled by this industry. And those are all the sectors you talk about. The 6 sectors that matter. It's healthcare, it's education, it's agriculture, it's energy, it's of course financial services, it's infrastructure, right? These 6 sectors will constitute to 50% of that opportunity. So if you haven't embraced it so far, there's a huge opportunity going forward to do that.
Right. Mr. Chandrashekhar, comment on that, because what role do you think the government can play? Because so far, if we see, government's attitude towards technology has been somewhat ambivalent. On one hand, you have campaigns like Digital India, but also the other hand, social media has somewhere spooked the government. It needed the Supreme Court of India to sort of intervene in that case. What role, how constructive a role do you think that the government can play in this regard?
At least 3 distinct areas in which government's interventions become important. First and foremost is in terms of the manner in which the government looks at fostering innovation and supporting the emergence of new kinds of solutions which leverage digital technologies, social media, mobility, analytics, cloud, Internet of Things, and so on. And a lot of these the challenge is that technology is moving very rapidly, but regulation almost by definition is a much slower moving object. Right. So how do you keep regulation abreast? For example, the way investments into this sector are taxed. Most of the innovation is funded by angel investment, by venture capital. And therefore, the manner in which it is taxed plays a key role in determining how conducive the environment is. And then there are, of course, small things like, the infrastructure, incubators, accelerators, in which the government support also becomes important. The second aspect is, if you look at regulation, how is e-commerce regulated? How are the financial sector regulated? Is that regulatory framework supportive of a rapid transition to a digital mode? For example, we've seen somewhat erratic application of regulation, let's say in e-commerce, how taxes are applied, and having a higher incidence of tax in the e-commerce mode as opposed to the physical mode, or having no clarity on the role of the intermediary in e-commerce and making the intermediary and the platform provider liable for anything and everything. So then we've seen, for example, RBI regulations, where the interplay between something like a 2-factor authentication and cloud services, and how it retards that. So these are areas, I think, where the government's role is also very important. The third aspect is government also has to make investments, critical investments, which provide the bedrock for the digital transformation. For example, the National Optical Fiber Network, providing broadband connectivity, because all of this cannot be met purely by commercial dynamics, and the government has to intervene. And this has been seen in country after country. So I think all of these are important. But what's critical is that the government perhaps cannot do all that it takes entirely on its own. A more collaborative effort and greater engagement with the industry is important.
Right. Because Mr. Martin, just coming back to the point on Uber, because that's important. I think that today, in today's context, that best exemplifies the government's efforts to grapple with this technology monster. Okay, nobody knows whether Uber is even for real or not. It's not a it's not a taxi company. It calls itself a technological sort of platform. So in that sense, is there but natural that there will always be a lag between technological innovation and regulation?
I think there will. I mean, I think I completely agree that the technology is moving faster than anything. Again, when I talk to the two different CEOs I talk to every day, when I ask what's the thing that worries or excites you the most, it's the first is always technology is moving 3 to 5 times faster than management, which if I said I would argue with government, is probably 7 to 10 times faster, just because it's just defining what it wants to do, what the consumer wants to do. Uber is one, exactly. The Airbnb, what they've done in the hotel industry. How do you think about taxing hotel nights for people? The other one is Alibaba, what it did in China. It went into the financial, they started to make loans to people, right? And they weren't a bank, right? And all of a sudden, at first, the central bank didn't pay too much attention, but given their scale, all of a sudden these guys became a serious financial institution. It was when they started to take deposits they said, "Whoa, stop it." Right. But and I think in healthcare you'll see that as well, because what it's done is it allows consumers to move and do what they want to do. And that's often, again, before the regulatory environment may be in place.
Technology companies making regulation in a broader sense, in the 20th century sense, irrelevant. The way we understood regulation at one point, high-handedness, sort of government laying the roadmap, and at least government knowing what is best for the consumers. In that sense, from that context, are technology companies making regulation irrelevant overall?
I think nobody knows what's best for the consumer except the consumer.
At least the government at one point claimed, or at least that was the impression.
I think what you're starting to see, and Dom spoke about it a little earlier, is that this pace of change. We used to talk about a decade. In fact, in our report, we talk about the decade in review, right? There's no decade left, right? I mean, if you look at the change today, if you looked at, you talked about retail and how fast Amazon and others have come up. If you take retail banking, and I total the 6 large payment attackers in the world, they would be the 19th largest bank in the world today, right? Taking almost 20% of the incremental retail banking spend, right? Now that is up from nothing a few years ago, right? That's the pace of change, and it's almost that, how do you regulate that? Because essentially you don't know what the use case is going to be. You don't know what consumers are going to want, right? But what we are hoping for is that as those use cases develop, regulation must be enabling. It must enable that innovation. It must sponsor and create that innovation.
On that note, let's slip into a quick commercial break. On the other side, there's lots more. Stay tuned.